would always love the Velifera, the big Sailfin, Yucatan Sailfin Mollies, and don't get many opportunities to get my hands on them. I resisted getting them for many years because I knew that they required a bigger tank, they required multiple feedings a day because they're grazers like cattle. They have to be, they do best when they're fed throughout the day in smaller amounts. So I obtained them about 4 years ago now, and now have quite a few here, and they're doing spectacularly. Many customers have written me with pictures of fish they bought that have gotten just as big and nice, with feedings of only 2 to 4 times per day, if that. Certainly at least twice. They're a spectacular fish. They're prolific, but you do have to give them more room. This tank has pretty heavy filtration on it. It's a 55, and it's a little bit overcrowded. But and when there are problems, if it is overcrowded, they'll start to get little fin infections. And when I start seeing that, little white spot on their fin, or they'll be, closing, doing some clamp fin stuff, then I'll go ahead and I'll thin the tank out a bit more. But the males show off probably 3-4 times a day, generally after water changes and feeding. And these guys are the centerpiece fish. I mean, I spend more time looking at these guys here, and they're just incredible wild fish. And again, this is not the hobby population. These were collected by a university in the Yucatan, and then raised at the university for about 15 years, and then they went out to a friend of mine in New York who was a breeder, kept them going. He had sold them to Charles Clapsaddle, and I had also gotten some. I don't know if Charles still has this wild line any longer, but that's what these guys are. This is a 100-gallon tank with one about 5-inch male, and there's a couple of young males coming up in here as well, and then a group of females. And quite prolific, quite active, very colorful. Up here I have a breeder going with young that I pull out of there every few days. We get a few more young. From there they go over to a 40 grow out. Yes, quite a trophy type fish. A fish that you can't avoid watching when you've got it in a show tank in your living room, or now I could put more males in here, and I have 2 others in the other tank that I will probably add to this. But I figure I probably need at least 3 more males in here to diffuse any aggression he's going to have to protect his territory. There was another big male that was in there, and he just harassed him such that I had to move him. And so I've left him alone with all these females. But he would probably show off more frequently if he had other males in the tank. When they arrive at this 40 breeder, they're put into this larger net that's a net breeder, where they can be watched carefully and then grown out and fed real heavily until they get big enough to run around with the big guys in here. This is the 40 breeder tank here, and this is where they continue to be grown out and where they're sold from. On the outside I have a little drain set up, and then I just put the hose on this guy and fill it up. I drain it down to here every day, and then fill it up back up to here every day, and that's the water change as it gets. And then they're fed as frequently as the other Velifera here. The Velifera tend to like it to be a little warmer, so some aquariums keep them as high as 82, 83, 84. Here a little warmer means 77, 78. So they do fine. I wouldn't want to go above 78. I don't think there's any need to. They do like a little bit harder of a water than what I generally have. So you'll see on the bottom of the tanks I have crushed oyster shell, although I don't have much here now. Yeah, it's all crushed oyster shell back there. And for the first year or so I had them, I checked the water qualities routinely to keep my pH up around 8.0 and my hardness a little elevated. I'm normally 7.4 and about 90 ppm here. But now they've been here, like I say, about 4 to 5 years, and they're acclimating in pretty well. And I'm kind of slowly, I'm not replacing the crushed coral as frequently, and they don't seem harmed by it at all. So essentially they're developing a good tolerance, and they still breed really well for the slightly softer water and the slightly lower pH. As to filtration for these guys, that's really important. As I mentioned before, this is a 55 and it's way overcrowded. In a 55-gallon tank, I wouldn't put more than about 3 pair in a tank. I have so many in here because I change water at such a rate, and I have enough filtration going on that I can keep this number healthfully. But I have found out that I can't put literally another fish in here. So about 3 pair would be good for a tank this size. This 55, I've got 3 box filters, 15% per day water changes, and then up here I have a hot magnum canister as additional filtration. And then live plants, minimal substrate, and some crushed coral or crushed oyster shell on the bottom. One thing I will mention is that I do not use salt. The breeder that I got them from said that this line had never been kept in salt, that salt was not something he'd ever used. I have found, however, that when they do ever have any problems, as I mentioned earlier, say the water quality begins to deteriorate, the first way you'll see it is that you'll see a little bit of a cloudiness in a tail fin or something, or a little bit of clamp fins going on. At that time, using a medicinal dose of salt, 1 tablespoon for every 5 gallons, I'll usually put in about a half medicinal dose and see what effect it has. That will usually clear it up within a day. I'll leave the salt in for 3 days and then start attritioning it out with water changes. And that usually takes care of any problems pretty easily. But whenever there's acclimation issues and they're moved, when you first get them, using a little bit of salt with these guys is not a bad thing, because they really like it. They adapt to it well, and it seems to have a great effect on keeping them healthy. As far as feeding goes, they get the white worms whenever they're available, daily if possible, and but just generally once a day. And they also get either earthworm flake or a beef heart flake. These are from Brine Shrimp Direct. They can come anywhere. They can come from anywhere. They get that once a day, or the white worms. But the majority of their food is this fortified green vegetable flake. And what I use is it's called Gray's Premium Vegetable Flake. I get it from Gemco. And that's pretty much constitutes 90% of their diet. It's a plant-based, but it's got lots of proteins in it that they need. And the combination of the green flake the majority of the time, and then either the white worms or possibly chopped up red worms, or earthworm flake or beef heart flake, keeps them really, as you can see, quite healthy and robust. Where'd the male go? There's a young male just sexing out right there. And bring him in a little bit. So here's an example of how they take so long to sex out. He's just beginning to show that he's going to be a male, and he's probably a good 7-8 months old. They're not big fry eaters. They don't have big batches. As big as these guys are, I don't see more usually than about 10 to 15 in a batch tops. But they leave the fry alone pretty much, and I just go in and pull out new fry as I see them. Like I say, I keep them in a separate upper breeder up here where they grow out enough, and these are about ready to be moved over to the 40 breeder. Okay, here's the first question. Doug writes, hey Greg, I have a question for you. The Velifera fry are doing the shimmies. Some are doing it, but not all the time, and not all of them all the time. I've seen other mollies do this, but not to this extent. Any suggestions? The shimmies is really common in a lot of Livebearers. I've seen swordtails do it and such, but it's really common in mollies. And it usually happens for one of two reasons in my experience. The first is that deterioration, so the water's deteriorated a bit, either due to lack of aeration or water quality has gone down. And the second reason is because of acclimation. Even if you move them into a good, clean environment, sometimes the acclimation is just too much, and you'll start seeing the shimmying. Shimmying is when they swim around like this a little bit. They're in distress, something's going on. It's a signal that there's other things happening. And you want to address it because you might start seeing clamped fins or even some whitishness in the fins of some of the other fish in a couple days if you don't take care of it right away. But there's an easy way to solve it. If it's a water quality issue, a simple 50% water change, and then the addition of, and I usually start off with a half medicinal dose of salt. 1 tablespoon per 5 gallons is a full medicinal dose. I'll usually start off with a half dose just to see if that'll solve the problem. I'll check back in a day. If the fish don't look better, then I'll go ahead and I'll add the second half so they get the full dose, and then I'll leave it that way for about 3 days. And that usually takes care of it, particularly with acclimation. That definitely takes care of it. I had it happen with the Velifera when I first got them here. I had them shipped to me from Florida, and they all got it the first day or two. And at first, the first time it happened, I had them shipped here about 4 times. The first time I freaked out, and just like anybody else, so I added salt, and I saw that it settled down. So now I just add a half medicinal salt to the water whenever I bring in fish like that to help acclimate them and to avoid that, so they don't start getting into shimmies and that sort of thing. But it's fairly common, and it's usually a signal that there's other things that need to be addressed. If it's a dirty thing, then you want to change your filter floss, go through and thoroughly siphon your gravel, maybe add some aeration. Mollies really like high aeration, lots of water movement, and because they eat so much, they're constantly taking in food, passing it out, particularly lots of vegetable matter. That's not great for water quality, so you kind of have to provide a little bit of extra filtration for the mollies. So I hope that answers the question. Thanks. Now this next email is from a guy named Richard, and it's been on my mind a lot lately because his problem and the situation he's having has a lot to do with a basic conversation that I seem to get into as to how much substrate is okay and how to set up an aquarium initially to best so the fish that I sell here best adapt and do well in your tank when they get to you. The fish I sell don't come from the hobby. They don't come out of the pet trade. Many of them have been here for at least 10 years. Some have been here the longest. I think I've got here about 15 years. But previous to my getting them, they were generally collected from the wild within a few years previous to that. And some of the fish here, such as the Cracodon lateralis, were just discovered in 2012. The Tigerlimia, for instance, was just collected in the wild for the first time in 1999. So the fish that I have here are not acclimated to living in higher nitrate environments and living in water that may not be that may be very inconsistent, as is commonly the case with new aquariums and aquariums that might have a lot of problems going on with them. Well, anyway, Richard writes me, and he had gotten some Tigerlimias from me, and he sounded from the very start like he knew what he was doing and that he was really serious about the tank he had going. He'd written me a couple times about which fish would be good for his tank and what would I recommend that he keeps. So based on the size fish he was looking for and the look he wanted, I recommended the Tigerlimias, but knowing nothing more about the kind of a tank he had going, or the setup he had. Well, anyway, he got the fish, and they're all doing well, except he had two that were shimmying, and he couldn't figure out why. So we went through a number of different types of things to find out why these fish were not acclimating to his tank real well, and looking at all the variables. And so what I do oftentimes is I say, send me a couple pictures of your tank so that I can take a look at it. Maybe we can, find out what the problem is. So he did, and so I'm going to share those with you. So so now we're going to go to a little bit of video. In the first picture, you can see this is obviously a very beautiful tank. It obviously takes very good care of it. Lots of stuff going on. Lots of plants that are rooted in the gravel. The issue is that that much substrate, when you put any kind of organic stuff into an aquarium, food, fish food, and the fish are respirating waste into the water. In a perfect world, the filter pulls all of that out, and through water changes, you keep a nice duplication of a wild environment going, where particularly for these fish that come from moving streams, there's this sense of the water constantly being replenished and the water quality stays high. When you have gravel like that, it absorbs a lot of that organic debris and that material. You have all these pockets throughout the aquarium that are inherent in the way it's set up, where mulm can accumulate, and you end up giving off ammonia and nitrates. You can even go through the tank and clean it with, clean all the mulm out around stuff and all of this, and still have ammonia and nitrates seeping up from your gravel because you have stuff in the gravel going on. In the second picture here, you can see where I've marked the actual depth of the gravel. And the problem is when you have something like that rock sitting on the gravel, it impedes the air movement as well as, of course, water movement underneath that rock, and you create what's called an anaerobic environment, where the bacteria are produced that do not need oxygen to live. And so they produce their own special little wastes and such, and when you clean out a particularly dirty aquarium, you'll recognize their byproduct by that rotten egg smell that you'll come across, and that's called hydrogen sulfide gas, and that's very toxic to the fish. So you don't want to have pockets in a tank where you have anaerobic areas that are producing wastes that are going to be toxic to your fish. Now in this third picture, things are a little more moderate, but you still have areas that are going to be difficult to control and to keep clean, and where you're probably going to generate issues that will cause problems for the fish that come from the wild lines that I have here. So one day someone asked me, well, do you have pictures of tanks that are set up the way you advocate, real nice looking aquariums, that do what you are asking people to do? So it got me thinking, so I ran a little contest. This was like maybe the second year of Select Aquatics, and I asked people to send me in pictures of their tanks. So they did, and we chose a couple of winners, and I posted them up for a bit at the website, so I'm going to go ahead and share these with you. So here are some of those pictures. And so the first picture is here. This gives you an idea of one of the kinds of things you can do. There's no substrate at all. It's actually a bare bottom tank. I believe he's got a little sprinkling of gravel under there for some nitrifying bacteria area. I personally am not a big fan of the fake background like that, but the look is really cohesive. It's very nice. It's obvious the person did a really good job, and it follows all the kinds of things I recommend with just keeping things clean and easy. And each of these tanks that you're about to see are very simple when you have to catch a fish, for instance, because things lift right out and you just put them right back again. In the second picture, you can see a little bit of a pot there, a little more obviously on the right, with some of my Odessa barbs and some rainbow fish in there. But he was, this person was able to get some, really nice growth of plants and really have it look nice and substantial, but again without a substrate. On this next picture, this person was a little bit more open about the fact that there were pots in the tank, and that onion plant was just a very cool plant. I thought that was very neat the way that looked, and he just happened to get the fish in a good position there on the left. The last picture here is where you have this person is a little bit more cluttered, a little more open about having the pots being seen. Again, I try to hide the pots whenever I can when I'm putting together a show tank. So you can see that there's nothing lost. You can have a really nice tank that looks just as great as the other, with water flowing through the entire area. The water stays clean and is replenished with your water changes and your filtration. And an added plus is that when you want to go into the tank to remove any fish, it's easy to do because things come on out. The big difference for me is that when I set a tank up, I try to think of a tank that's going to stay that way for the long period of time. I don't want to set up a tank like I did for years. I had many big, heavy substrated bottoms like everybody, but I found that every 18 months, a year, 18 months or so, I'd have to tear the whole thing down, clean everything out, get all that smelly stuff out, and start from scratch. And so eventually, over time, it evolved toward this kind of thing where now I find that the fish are a lot more colorful, a lot more robust. They grow at their potential, they produce at their potential, and they're healthy. And you can make the tanks look just as great without adding in all of that material that tends to collect debris and organic waste and fuss with your water qualities. So I hope that made sense. Thanks. Well, thank you for watching this video on the Poecilia Velifera. And the next one is going to be on the Xiphophorus mayi with questions, one of them dealing with sex ratio for the most efficient breeding of some of the Livebearers here, which differs between species. So anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.